The office always changed after hours. The hum of conversation vanished into silence, leaving only the ambient drone of vending machines, the flicker of hallway lights dimmed for the evening, and the muffled clack of my shoes against the polished tile. Most nights I was the last to leave. My role as regional director came with the weight of deadlines, presentations, late-night negotiations, and a constant stream of unread emails. But that night, I wasn't alone. Her light was still on. Natalie Sanders, my executive secretary, had been with the company for 4 years, and with me for 2. She was efficient, intuitive, almost impossibly poised. There were days she could anticipate my mood before I walked in. Her desk was always organized, her tone crisp and courteous, her presence commanding yet never overbearing. But behind that professionalism, there was something else. Something I noticed in the way her gaze lingered just a moment too long when we passed in the hallway, or in the faint curve of her smile when I gave her an unexpected compliment. I'd ignored it, or tried to, but as I walked past her office that night, I saw her through the narrow glass panel, still at her desk, hair tied back in a neat chignon, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal her wrists, fingers moving slowly across the edge of a file. She wasn't working anymore. She was waiting, and I knew it. "Natalie?" I knocked softly on the doorframe, keeping my voice neutral. "You're still here?" She looked up slowly, eyes catching mine. Warm, dark, unreadable. "Yes. I was going over the Forsyth account notes again. There are some discrepancies that didn't sit right with me." I hesitated, unsure why her presence pulled at something beneath my skin. I leaned against the doorframe, loosening the top button of my shirt. "You didn't have to stay this late." "I know." She stood up, walked slowly to the edge of her desk, the faint click of her heels matching the rhythmic beat of my pulse. "But I thought you might." Her words landed like an echo in a cavern, soft but resonant. I stepped into the room, the overhead lamp casting a gentle halo around her. The door shut behind me, not with a slam, not even a click, just a quiet finality. We didn't speak for a moment. Her office smelled faintly of bergamot and cedarwood, calming, familiar. She moved past me toward the blinds and adjusted them without a word, blocking the view from the hallway. It was such a small gesture, but everything changed in that instant. She turned to me again, her expression composed but unreadable. "I wanted to talk," she said, voice barely above a whisper, without phones ringing or people watching or emails waiting. I nodded slowly. "Okay." Natalie took a breath and leaned back against the edge of her desk, crossing one ankle over the other, her fingers lightly gripping the edge behind her. Her blouse shifted just enough to reveal the soft rise and fall of her chest. She wasn't trying to be seductive. She didn't need to be. It was something in the way she looked at me, as if she was finally letting me see the version of her she kept hidden behind agendas and appointment reminders. "I've been thinking about something," she said, "for a while." Her voice was low and slow, each word deliberate, as if she was afraid that speaking too quickly might fracture the moment. "What is it?" I asked, my voice dry, throat tightening. She looked away for a second, almost shyly, then back at me. "This tension. You feel it, don't you?" I didn't answer right away. The air in the room seemed to thicken between us. My jaw clenched slightly, pulse quickening. "Yes," I admitted. I felt it for a long time. Her eyes softened, the faintest relief passing over her features. Then she straightened, stepped around the desk slowly, deliberately closing the distance between us. My breath caught, not from shock, but from recognition. We had been circling this moment for months, maybe longer. Her fingers brushed mine, barely, but it was enough to send a jolt through me. A test. A whisper of permission. I didn't move. I couldn't. "I didn't want to cross a line," she said softly, her voice trembling with restraint. "But I think we're already standing on it." I looked at her. Really looked. The way her lips parted slightly as she exhaled, the faint flush rising along her throat, the cautious desire that shimmered beneath her calm exterior like heat under glass. And I realized that this moment wasn't impulsive. It was inevitable. I reached out then, slowly, my hand brushing her arm, trailing down to her wrist. Her skin was warm, soft beneath my touch. Her breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in. The space between us vanished. Not with a kiss, not yet, but with a kind of closeness that was more intimate than contact. Her forehead nearly touched mine, and I could feel her breath against my lips. Shallow, hesitant. "This isn't about the Forsyth account, is it?" I murmured. She smiled then, slow, knowing, vulnerable. "No," she whispered. "It's about us." And when she finally pressed her lips to mine, it wasn't fiery or rushed. It was cautious, reverent, as if she was asking a question only I could answer. I kissed her back gently, my hand sliding to the small of her back, pulling her closer. Her arms wrapped around me, not in desperation, but in certainty. We broke apart just enough to look at each other, both breathing a little heavier, both unsure of what we'd just begun, but knowing, without question, that we couldn't stop now. "I should have left when I had the chance," I said, half joking, voice hoarse. "You didn't want to," she replied, her lips ghosting mine again. She was right. And as the blinds rattled softly in the silence, as the city outside sank deeper into night, I knew that the line we had just crossed, whatever name we gave it, was permanent. We stood in her office, pressed together, heartbeat to heartbeat, and the world beyond her door felt suddenly very far away. The silence that followed our kiss wasn't empty. It pulsed, hummed with electricity, with all the things we had never said, never dared to say aloud, now rushing to fill the space between us like a wave cresting in slow motion, suspended in tension and heat. Natalie stood so close I could see the shimmer of moisture on her lips, could feel the tremor in her breath as her chest rose and fell against mine, both of us suspended in that fragile space between control and surrender. I didn't speak. Couldn't. Because words would have broken the moment, reduced something profound into something explainable. And what was happening between us wasn't meant to be explained. It was meant to be felt. Her fingers, delicate and sure, moved slowly up my chest, trailing along the crisp line of my collarbone beneath my shirt, not seducing so much as discovering, tracing the shape of a question she had never been brave enough to ask until now. I closed my eyes for a brief second as her hand rested there, feeling the weightless pressure of her touch, the certainty of it, the way it was both careful and urgent, as though she were giving herself permission to act on a desire that had waited far too long to surface. When I opened them, her gaze was already fixed on mine, wide and dark and shining, with something that looked like longing, but deeper. Need, maybe. Or hunger tempered by restraint. The kind that only builds with time and quiet denial. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low and barely audible, as if anything louder would undo the delicacy of what we had stepped into. "I've thought about this," she said, her fingers brushing the edge of my jaw, her thumb resting just beneath my chin. More than I should have. I swallowed hard, not from nervousness, but from the weight of what I was about to admit, the gravity of it sinking into my chest like a stone. "You're not the only one," I murmured, my hand moving instinctively to the curve of her waist, feeling the warmth of her through the thin fabric of her blouse. The way she leaned into my touch with a soft intake of breath, subtle but unmistakable. It was impossible now to pretend this was just a moment of impulse. Everything in the way we stood together, the way our bodies responded to one another, spoke of something long in the making, something deliberate and unspoken, nurtured in stolen glances and lingering silences. I watched her lips part slightly, as if about to say something more, but instead she pressed forward slowly, her forehead touching mine, and we stood there like that, still, close, breath mingling, as though we were learning how to exist in this new space we had created together. I could smell her perfume now, not just the scent she wore every day, but the warmer, more intimate scent of her skin beneath it, something subtle and human and entirely hers, and I wanted to drown in it. When our lips met again, it was different than the first time. Not tentative, not searching, but sure, weighted with all the things we had both refused to feel for so long. And I kissed her back with the kind of urgency that only comes when restraint has been stretched to its breaking point. My hands moved up her back, feeling the lines of her spine through the silk of her blouse, and I felt her shiver beneath my palms, felt the way her fingers clenched ever so slightly in the fabric of my shirt as her body pressed against mine. We kissed slowly, deeply, with the kind of hunger that wasn't rushed, wasn't careless, but was charged with the awareness that every second we shared was reshaping the boundary between us. She pulled back just enough to look at me again, her eyes searching mine as if confirming that I was truly there, truly with her, truly willing to follow this wherever it led, and I was. She exhaled slowly, then stepped away, only slightly, walking toward the leather love seat near the corner of her office with that same calm grace she always carried, though I could see the tension in her shoulders now, the quiet storm rolling just beneath her surface. I followed her, slowly, as though drawn by a thread I couldn't sever, even if I wanted to, the air between us now thick with a shared vulnerability that made every movement feel heavier, more meaningful. Natalie sat down, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap for a moment, then unfolded, reaching up to let her hair down with one slow motion that sent a ripple of breathless silence through me. Her chestnut waves fell across her shoulders, softening her, undoing the image of the perfect professional I'd always seen behind the desk, revealing something raw, more human, more deeply compelling. She looked up at me from beneath her lashes, then patted the seat beside her. "You don't have to say anything," she said, voice steady now, but with a trace of vulnerability that pulled at something deep inside me. I sat beside her, closer than I should have, letting my thigh brush against hers, letting the warmth of her presence settle into me like a current I didn't want to resist. She turned slightly toward me, one knee pressing into mine, and the way she looked at me, soft, open, unguarded, made it impossible not to reach for her hand. I took it gently, tracing her fingers with mine, exploring the delicate bones and soft skin, learning her all over again in silence. Her head tilted slightly, and then she leaned into me, her shoulder pressing against mine, and I wrapped my arm around her instinctively, holding her close, her breath warming the curve of my neck. The way she curled into me wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet, natural, like falling into something we both had wanted for so long that it felt like a return instead of a discovery. She turned her face toward mine again, her lips brushing my jaw, her breath a whisper against my skin, and the quiet sound she made as our mouths found each other again was the most intimate thing I'd ever heard. This time, there was no hesitation. Our kiss was deeper, slower, and as our hands moved, exploring, discovering, memorizing, I realized we were no longer in the office. Not really. We were in the space between who we had been and who we were becoming, and it was vast and dangerous and exhilarating. Her hand slipped beneath the collar of my shirt, her fingertips grazing bare skin, and the way she touched me, tentative, reverent, told me this wasn't about conquest, or distraction, or rebellion. This was something real. I kissed her harder, feeling her respond with a soft gasp, her hand pressing flat against my chest, and in that moment I felt it, that mutual unraveling, that shared surrender, the point of no return, blooming quietly between us. We stayed like that for a long time, tangled in one another, neither of us speaking, both of us trembling at what we had awakened, and when we finally pulled apart, breathing heavy, cheeks flushed, eyes glassy with emotion, I knew, without a shadow of doubt, this was no longer just about desire. It was about something deeper, something terrifying and beautiful, and neither of us would ever be the same. The hours after that moment blurred into a kind of luminous haze, not because they lacked clarity, but because everything within them became intensified, sharpened by the knowledge that we had willingly crossed a threshold we could never retreat from. And now every word, every glance, every breath between us felt more significant, more precious, more dangerously close to something we could no longer control. Natalie didn't let go of my hand as we sat in the soft, muted glow of her office lamps. Her fingers curled gently between mine, the back of her knuckles grazing the side of my thigh as if to reassure both herself and me that what had just happened hadn't been a hallucination brought on by tension or proximity or long days behind closed doors, but something real, something alive, something trembling just beneath the surface of our skin. I could still feel the weight of her body as she had leaned into me, the subtle pressure of her hip against mine, the soft flutter of her breath, when her lips had moved over my jaw and down the curve of my neck, not with hunger, but with aching deliberateness, the kind that left heat behind in its absence. She turned her head to look at me, her eyes wide and searching, 1,000 silent questions darting behind them, and I knew without her speaking that she was trying to make sense of it, of us, of whatever it was that had just unfolded between the polished professionalism we lived in by day and this unspoken truth that now pulsed between us like a second heartbeat. "I didn't plan this," she said softly, the words tumbling out like a confession, not defensive, not ashamed, but fragile in their honesty, and her voice quivered ever so slightly, as if she feared saying it aloud might somehow dismantle what we had just shared. "I know," I replied, my thumb brushing lightly across the back of her hand, drawing small circles there, grounding her, grounding myself, because despite the rush of emotion churning in my chest, there was also something tender beneath it, something quiet and steady that made me want to protect this, protect her. She turned toward me fully now, one leg tucked beneath the other, and her free hand reached up to touch my face, tentative at first, her fingers grazing the corner of my mouth, then my cheek, and I leaned into the warmth of her palm, as if it had been waiting there for me all along. "I've watched you walk past my desk 100 times," she said, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile, but held the memory of one. "And every time I'd wonder if you noticed the way I always paused when you did, if you saw how I stopped typing just to listen to your voice." "I noticed," I said, my voice low and rough with emotion, because I had noticed her in every room we shared, in every morning coffee handoff, every quietly exchanged glance during meetings, every unspoken word tucked between emails and calendar reminders. Her eyes closed briefly, a sigh slipping past her lips, not of regret, but of relief. And when she opened them again, there was a fire in them, slow, burning, unafraid, the kind of fire that didn't need to roar to be felt. "We can't pretend anymore, can we?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. And I shook my head slowly, because the truth between us was no longer a question. It was a presence, thick and undeniable, and breathing just beneath our skin. There was something so intimate about how still the room had become, as if the world outside her door had faded entirely, and we now existed in a space that was only ours, suspended somewhere between two lives, the one we were expected to live, and the one we were beginning to claim in the hush of this moment. Her body moved closer to mine again, slow and graceful and intentional, until her legs were draped across my lap and her arms circled my neck, and I caught the soft, secret smile that played at the corners of her lips as she pressed her forehead to mine. I wrapped my arms around her waist, pulling her closer, until there was no distance between us at all, just the shared rhythm of breath, the warmth of skin through fabric, the slow, simmering tension that bloomed in the space where desire and restraint collided. She kissed me again, and this time it was deeper, fuller. Not in haste, but in confirmation, as if we were sealing something sacred between us, and I felt her fingers tighten against my shoulders as her body shifted, pressing into mine with a need that was quiet but unmistakable. Every move she made seemed like a sentence written without words, her fingertips trailing down my neck like a punctuation mark, the way her breath hitched when I slid my hands along the curve of her back like an ellipsis, hanging in the air, waiting for what came next. I didn't rush her, didn't press for more, because there was something beautiful in how slowly we unfolded into each other. How every brush of skin, every whispered breath, every heartbeat layered something new onto the story we were writing, in silence and sensation. She rested her head against my chest, her cheek just above my heart, and I held her there as if she belonged in that space. And maybe she did. Maybe we had always been moving toward this, toward each other, despite everything that stood between us. I could feel the rise and fall of her breathing, slow and steady now, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the outline of a button on my shirt, and I leaned down to press my lips to the top of her head, the scent of her hair, faint lavender and something uniquely Natalie, filling my lungs like a memory I hadn't realized I needed. "I don't want this to be a mistake," she whispered after a long pause, her voice fragile, honest. The kind of vulnerability that can only be shared when all masks are stripped away. "It's not," I said firmly, cupping her jaw in my hand and lifting her face until our eyes met again, and what I saw there made my chest ache with something that felt dangerously close to love. Her lips parted as if to speak, but instead she leaned into me again, and our mouths met with a new urgency, not reckless, not rushed, but full of all the things we couldn't say yet, all the emotions we had tried to hide behind professionalism and routine. Her hands moved through my hair, down my back, pulling me closer as our kiss deepened, and the quiet moan that escaped her throat made my entire body respond, every nerve suddenly aware of how fragile the moment was, how desperately I wanted it to last. I ran my hands along her sides, feeling the shape of her through the thin layers of fabric, the softness of her curves, the strength in her shoulders, and the way she pressed into me with trust, with need, with something raw and real that made it impossible to imagine stopping now. When we finally paused for breath, she looked at me with flushed cheeks and eyes darkened by something deeper than attraction, and she rested her palm against my chest, over my heart, as if to mark her place there. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked quietly, almost afraid to hear the answer. "Yes," I said, not blinking, not hesitating, because I did feel it. This connection that had been building for months in subtle gestures and stolen moments, now bursting into something undeniable. She closed her eyes and exhaled, then let her hand slide from my chest to my fingers again, lacing them together. And in that gesture, simple, steady, intimate, I saw everything we hadn't yet spoken out loud. The longing, the risk, the choice. We stayed there like that, wrapped in each other's presence, hearts thudding in quiet unison. And I knew the rest of the night would stretch long ahead of us, not with answers, but with the beginning of a truth we could no longer ignore. And in her arms, beneath the soft hum of the city lights filtering through the blinds, I realized that what we were building wasn't a moment. It was the beginning of something irreversible. The days that followed weren't ordinary, though we pretended they were. The rhythm of the office resumed its usual tempo. Meetings, reports, polite nods in the hallway. But beneath every word spoken and every glance exchanged between Natalie and me, there pulsed a quiet undercurrent, a current of tension and memory and possibility. We moved through that week like dancers in a performance only we could feel, brushing hands too briefly when passing a file, lingering a second too long at each other's door, speaking in carefully measured tones while our eyes betrayed what was still unspoken between us. It was as if we had struck a match in the dark and then spent every day pretending not to see the glow. By Thursday, something had shifted. Not in words, not in action, but in the atmosphere itself, as if every unspoken truth was gathering mass, ready to demand its release. And I knew, before she even asked me to stay late again, I knew that the moment we'd been circling for months would not wait any longer. The office emptied around us, the clicks of heels and muted goodbyes fading like the closing lines of a play. Natalie didn't come to my office this time. She waited in hers, door half closed, light turned low, and something about the way the shadows moved across the glass panels sent a shiver through me, not of cold, but of anticipation. I didn't knock. I entered quietly, slowly, my hand grazing the doorframe before closing it behind me, sealing the two of us in that soft, golden stillness. She was standing by the window, arms crossed loosely, looking out into the night. Her silhouette was framed in the glow of the city below, and for a moment I didn't say a word. I simply watched her. "I thought you might not come," she said without turning. "I thought about staying away," I replied, voice steady, but I didn't want to lie to myself anymore. She turned then, slowly, and the look in her eyes silenced everything else. There was no smile, no playful spark, only quiet certainty, and something else too, something raw and vulnerable, as if she were standing in front of me, not as the composed woman I'd always known, but as the one she kept hidden beneath layers of restraint and professionalism. "I can't keep pretending," she said, taking a step forward. "Every day I try to act like we didn't cross that line. But I can still feel you. I feel that moment in every breath I take." I stepped toward her, our bodies drawing together without thought. My pulse thundered in my ears, but my voice was calm, filled with something deeper than desire, something closer to truth. "We've already crossed it, Natalie," I whispered, "and I don't want to go back." She reached for me then slowly, deliberately, her fingers threading through mine as she drew my hand to her chest. I could feel the beat of her heart through the thin fabric of her blouse, fast, rhythmic, alive, and it matched my own perfectly. "I don't want to go back either," she said, and then, finally, she pulled me to her. Our mouths met with no hesitation this time, no caution, no trembling boundaries to keep us apart. It was a kiss that shattered the space between what we had wanted and what we were finally allowing ourselves to have. Her hands slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, and my arms circled her waist as I pressed her against me, our bodies fitting together like a question, and its answer. She made a sound in her throat, half sigh, half gasp, as our kiss deepened, and I could feel her melt into me, her body yielding and eager, her fingers tightening in my hair. The heat between us rose with every breath, every touch, every shared heartbeat, until we were no longer two people navigating tension, but one rhythm, one fire, one inevitable storm. We stumbled toward the leather love seat in the corner, lips never parting, hands roaming now with more urgency, more confidence. I sank down, pulling her gently into my lap, and she straddled me without hesitation, her thighs tight against my hips, her hands cupping my face as our kisses grew hungrier, deeper, unrestrained. Every motion now carried weight, every sigh a confession. Her blouse fell from her shoulder as I kissed along the line of her neck, and she tilted her head back, eyes fluttering closed, mouth parting with a soft gasp. I ran my hands along her back, memorizing every inch, every curve, and when she whispered my name, just my name, it nearly undid me. We didn't speak again. Words would have only slowed what was already burning too brightly to contain. We moved together, slowly, deliberately, learning each other through hands and mouths, through breath and heartbeat. Her forehead rested against mine, her hands trembling slightly, as we kissed and kissed and kissed, our bodies arching together in slow rhythm, our clothes loosened just enough to allow touch where we had only imagined it before. And then, it happened, the irreversible moment. She pressed her lips to mine, and in one fluid, breathless motion, she sank against me completely, our bodies fusing in a way that left no more space, no more distance, no more denial. Her breath hitched sharply, and I wrapped my arms around her, holding her as if I could anchor her, as if I could hold the weight of everything we were becoming in my hands. We stayed that way, entwined, breathless, trembling, as the office disappeared around us. There was no guilt, no fear, only the overwhelming clarity that this was no longer something we could walk away from. Natalie rested her head on my shoulder, her breathing still shallow, her lips brushing the edge of my jaw as her fingers laced with mine. "We'll figure it out," I whispered, my voice low, steady, certain. She nodded, eyes closed, a small smile curling at the edge of her mouth. "We already are." And in that quiet office, high above a city that never stopped moving, we held each other in the aftermath of everything we had dared to feel, because we had crossed the line, and we didn't regret it, not for a second, not anymore, not ever.